Hello, and welcome to WANA Pod by WANA Learning, the podcast where we explore innovative ways to learn, grow, and stay successful in our ever-evolving world. I'm your host, Nisa Burrell, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this journey. Welcome to today's episode, where we're joined by Tunde Agoro, an inspiring leader and environmental consultant. Tunde's work is at the forefront of sustainability, helping businesses across the world tackle some of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. With a focus on climate change and sustainable practices, he's dedicated to shaping a more sustainable future for both organisations and communities. But Tunde's story goes beyond his career. He's also a black man who navigated the journey of immigrating to the UK, where his experiences have deeply shaped his professional values and leadership style. There is so much good content to cover, and that is why this time we are splitting WANA Pod into part 1 and part 2. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us. And I've personally found your career in sustainability inspiring. So can we start from the beginning? What has inspired you to pursue this path? And how did you get started in environmental consultancy?
Right, thanks, Nisa, and it's great to be here on this podcast. And yeah, it's been fun as well working alongside you, while we were Holy. So yeah, to your question, that's a very good place to start at the very beginning, isn't it? So I started out not as an environmental engineer or environmentalist. I actually started out as an environmental designer. So that's a fancy engineering term to say architect. So I started out designing spaces, even um, designing neighborhoods, and towns. And I think I really enjoyed that bit of urban regeneration and the wider vision casting for how, people and spaces can integrate and work together, right? To create this cohesive, brilliant, you know, um, space or community or network of interaction for people. And somewhere along the line in my career, I got stung by the sustainability bug. And this was really when I looked at the impact of oil exploration and exploitation in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, where I was born and where I lived at the time. The impact were devastating, not
Mm.
just on the environment, but also on people. And I saw this firsthand. The things protesters and activists talked about in media, it seemed to be far-fetched for people elsewhere, but I was there. I mean, you could see rivers that are black with, you know, crude oil. You could see very dark skies, because of soot, that is coming down from, you know, um, uh, glass flaring and all sorts of things going on. And there were other bits of things happening, the unrest in terms of the community, and it basically fractured community,
Mm.
and as a further impact of this is projects that were being done that were not sustainable, funded by the revenue from, this gold that was discovered, right? And some of those projects were things like incineration plants, which were supposed to deal with waste, right? Is a waste management, if you like, strategy. But how does that work in a society where 60, 70% of the waste stream is biodegradable?
Mm.
Why are you incinerating that? Right.
Yeah.
So there were all sorts of things going on that I just felt this cannot be right. So there was a lot of adoption of international technology or processes which I felt needed to be adapted,
Hmm.
right, more sensibly to the local context. So this is what fueled my passion and interest in how, as an architect, designing spaces, designing neighborhoods, and how people interact and use them um, uh, needs to be embedded more with technology and engineering solutions, and more of a systemic or systematic thinking, approach to it. And I thought, oh, I need to do some environmental engineering here. I thought that might be what I need. That might give me a platform, to understand these things better, and to be able to, if you like, transfer that into my professional work. So, and I applied for a scholarship, Shivdin Scholarship, which is funded by the Foreign Commonwealth Office UK, and ended up in Imperial College to do environmental engineering. But it wasn't just an environmental engineering master's, it was sandwiched with sustainable development. And that's where I got stung by the bug of sustainability, because the facilitator for that module was Professor David Fisk, who at the time was a chief scientific advisor for the Prime Minister on sustainable development, right? And he was so full of passion. His brilliance and intelligence just blew me away. Immediately, I was like, yes, that's what I want. So, believe it or not, that was my core focus, on my
Mm.
master's, the sustainable development module. So much so that after I left Imperial, my course director was tooting my horns all around the place, saying, the star of my class, the star of my class. And that's how I started my career in sustainable development, because he took me to ACOM and said, you need to hire this guy, and they spoke with me, and I started my professional walk in sustainability at ACOM Sustainable Development Group.
I love that. Because what's coming across is, yes, you're passionate for it. You can hear that. And obviously, that's come from your lived experience. And I
Yes.
think, as you say, for some people, this idea of it's not on my back door
Mm,
gives them a sort of sense of detachment from what's really happening. And that's something we can't have.
absolutely.
But it's clear that actually for you, it's a mission as well. It's something that's really, really driving you. And as somebody that works on climate change and environmental issues as an individual, you know the limitation of being an individual, which is why you've gone into this
Oh, yeah.
as a career, as a profession. So,
Correct.
how do you see the roles of businesses evolving to continue this fight against climate change?
Oh yes, so I think again this is so important, right? I think at the core of every business, it has to be stewardship.
Mm,
And this is why I love the theme of this year's Earth Day. It's very personalized. Our planet, our power. Okay, all right, and also by extension, our people. Right. I think businesses need to see this a bit closer up,
mm,
because there is no business without a planet. There is no economic development that can happen outside of planetary and natural resources. We exploit these things for profit, for gain, for growth, for advancement, or whatever you want to call it. So it cannot be ignored. All right. And we do have a responsibility to this planet for all the amazing thing it does for us. The services, well, in environmental terms, we call them ecosystem services, right? In terms of number one, giving us some bubble to live in. It basis for existence, right? It provides us subsistence, in terms of food, water, the air that we breathe, the vegetation around us. It regulates pollution, the things that we emit that
mm,
potentially harmful to us. It cleanses these things, it provides us existence, right? And beyond that, it has meaning to our existence in the sense that, we all love to go to nature, right? Because of what it does for us, right? Whether it's for leisure, for recreation or pastime. And for some people, it provides a spiritual connection, a spiritual delight. There's so much to the planet right now. I'm just talking about all the things beyond the basis for economic transaction and growth and development. So we have a huge responsibility in terms of managing a lot of unintended consequences of our activities, right, on the planetary resources. And there's no greater part of society that has a bigger impact on planet resources like business.
Mm.
All right. So, and in sustainability, we have certain principles like polluters pay principle. We businesses need to take ownership to the next level, right? They need to embed stewardship really firmly, at the heart of this. There was a recent report, but this was from the IPCC in their sixth assessment report on climate change. um, so IPCC is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, all right, which is a panel which is part of the United Nations, and globally they track climate change emissions and and provide assessment reports on how we can achieve that 1.5 degree C scenario, right? And the last report they did, which was last year, I think it was a sixth assessment report. One of the key things that came out of that is in terms of looking at the impact on climate change, businesses have about 30% in terms of what they do, right? So that's a third, right, in terms of decisions and actions that they can make. Governments and associated industries also have about 30 odd percent, and individuals also surprisingly had about another 30% in terms of what their choices, can do to stir and, this outcome in terms of climate change and global warming. So yeah, very bringing it to home, right? Businesses have a big part to play, and it no longer should it be seen as an altruism or just some corporate social responsibility, or yeah, let's just make ourselves look good and nice, let's no, it's got to become more intentional. It's got to be more deliberate. It's got to be mainstream, part of business operation philosophy, going forward, not an added on, not an afterthought, not something to just hush, the critics, or what have you. But like I said, it's got to be integrated into what the business is all about. Environmental, social impacts, consequences have to be internalized, as part of the baseline. Full stop.
Beautifully put. I think one of the things that you touched on for me is the fact that it's our responsibility and our inputs that can actually make a huge change. And this concept of stewardship as a business, if you combine that business impact of 30% and an individual's impact of 30%, we're nearly there. It's actually a huge amount, and you just need people to really, really believe in it. And, we know businesses are increasingly investing in sustainability, but they're investing in it almost as a let's just throw some money at it and it'll go away. But we know that the real impact will come from innovation and innovative solutions from businesses. So, what are some of the most innovative projects that you've been involved in, and what impact do you believe that they will have in the long term?
Innovation is key, right? And as you rightly said, Nisa, it's the only way we can get ourselves out of this malarkey that we're in, because the current thinking has only brought us this far. It's thinking outside the box. It's pretty much breaking the box. It's been very open-minded and being less risk adverse.
Mm.
Um, because I think someone said once the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. So business as usual has failed, and we got to think things differently. So for me, my closest some of sort of interaction has been in the property sector, real estate, construction, building design, and most recently in the energy sector, working with oil and gas and renewable energy generation and operating companies, and of course, I work across other sectors as well. But primarily, let's talk about construction, right? In terms of the proportion of buildings in the UK, there's a vast majority of buildings that are on brownfield sites and abandoned. I think we need to rethink how we use buildings. For a long time, it's just been easier to just build something new, tear down what is old. I think looking at ways to repurpose existing buildings more and more um, should be the way to go. And that there was a project I worked on in Wales, in Cardiff actually. It's called biophilic living. Fantastic project. Existing structure just by a car park, and what the developers decided to do is to repurpose a commercial building, right? And then integrate residential into that, okay? And the building has been so well done in the sense that 70%, uh, that's a lie, more than 70% of the existing has been completely retained, albeit it's also been extended vertically to include more residential apartments. But most of that, again, is using a lot of reclaimed materials, reclaimed bricks. Um, and a lot of the facade is very green. There's a lot of PV generation panels on there. On certain floors, there are communal terraces that include vertical farming, which is basically designed to be co-owned by the users of the building. Again, that is bringing social connection and interaction as well as ecological, stewardship, and, bringing a lot of awareness and understanding of what our impacts, can have on the planet and how we can minimize that, how we can manage that, and doing something very tangible, to address that. So yeah, I think that is one fantastic example of reimagining what living in the 21st century could look like, right? So rather than having just single purpose buildings, an office block, which probably runs from 9 to 5, and then from 5 to whatever, it's just empty, and you got lights running, and it's just a waste, right? But by having, if you like, multi-use design buildings, that has to be the standard practice. You have our high streets that become ghost towns, after work hours, but you could keep, high streets more vibrant, by integrating living into it, by integrating retail, commercial, everything in one place. That's truly the way we can achieve that 15-minute neighborhood where everything you need is within a 15-minute walk rather than having to drive to everything, out of town. So, biophilic living, I think for me, is a great example of how you can build sustainably, or how we can actually live closer to nature, how we can live in such a way that we bring and integrate people together in a very sustainable and meaningful way together.
Love that. And you've touched on so many things. And for those that were listening, PVs means photovoltaics, solar panels.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think is important about this project you've touched on is that there are so many facets that have come together on this, from repurposing, recycling, keeping the structure of what you've got to use. Like I said, over 70% was retained. All of that combined with this element of actually how do we expect people to use this space and how would we like them to build that community
Mm,
so it goes forward. And this idea of the 15-minute kind of walking environment, I think just sounds brilliant, quite frankly. You've touched on some really practical things that that project looked at. And, we've spoken before that this is being launched on Earth Day. And for me, that's a time of reflection and action.
mm. Yeah.
So for those listening, what are some really simple, effective steps that individuals and businesses trying to get to that plus 60% influence can
Mm.
take to reduce their environmental impact?
Yeah. I talk about this a lot, simply because a lot of time we feel and we underestimate our own impact and contribution. And I just want to reiterate, and I want to actually make a very strong point about this. Every individual matters. Our contribution matters, and which is why I love Tesco's mantra, every little helps, right? Because it all contributes to achieving that critical mass, right? As individuals, the choice that we make does not stop at us. There is a ripple domino effect, right? I can decide to do or make a lifestyle change, which a friend would see and could inspire it. My choices could be the catalyst of change, right? And that could help create that critical mass I was talking about. So never underestimate your contribution. It never stops at you. The choice you make as a parent will affect your kids, will affect your partner, will affect even your family and community. Um, my neighbor put in a PV on their roof, right? What's a catalyst? To many of us doing the same because like, oh wow, that's great, so we can do that. All right. So the truth is, and like I said earlier on, we all definitely have a huge part to play. Albeit in terms of impact, we know there are bodies like nations and countries through policies and whatever sort of regulatory tools that they can deploy can have a bigger, impact, in one fell swoop. Um, Nevertheless, we should never underestimate, the impact our own choices can also make. So whilst we might not be able to, change the direction of the industry altogether, but we can through our own little contributions in community, in professional organizations or bodies that we belong to, in think tanks, you know, all this makes sense. And a case study is, for example, if you look across the pond in the United States, um, in Donald Trump's first sting at the office, it did pull the USA out of the Paris Agreement, and everybody thought, "Oh, that's the end of it." Now, if the world's biggest emitter is going to, renege on its commitments and withdraw this, then we are all doomed. But the opposite happened. We saw state governments, we saw industry, you know, rallying together and accelerating, doubling down on their commitments to becoming net zero, right? So I'm just trying to say, look, it's bottom up as much as it is
Mm.
top down. All right. But we look so much to the top to political ambitions and to political regimes and what are the leaders doing that we forget that we collectively can have a huge impact as well. So I would say going forward, do not underestimate what your choice is. can do. First for yourself and to your immediate circle and further afield, right? People seeing change and what good looks like through you and your choices might just be what they need to take a step towards a sustainable, or rather more sustainable trajectory.
Brilliant. I know we've spoken previously about be the change you want to see, and I think that's touching on it. And for
Mm,
me, it feels a little bit odd that in 2025, we're still having a conversation that you and I probably had about years ago.
mm.
But it's interesting that there's still that challenge in helping people to understand actually what can you do. So I just wanted to know actually, what do you think the biggest challenge is when it comes to promoting sustainability, particularly with industries,
Mm.
and especially where financial considerations are obviously at the forefront of the mind over environmental ones? So, how are you tackling this challenge?
Oh, listen, I got asked this question at a conference just last month, and it was such a difficult one to answer. Difficult to answer because when it comes to sustainability, um, there is an interesting privilege in that space, which we don't often talk about. It's the green privilege, right? Almost everything sustainable is 10x, in terms of 10 times the cost. It's so much more expensive, and that's a big challenge, in terms of the cost of making a sustainable choice. If you wanted to teach mainstream, food supplies and you want to go organic, for example, you're going to pay a premium for it. I was thinking of changing my shoes, a while ago, and I thought, you know what? I want to go for a sustainable shoe, a shoe that's 100% from recycled materials, maybe harvested plastics from, you know, um, the oceans or from wherever that could have been otherwise, you know, um, harmful to the planet, but repurposed in that way. And believe me or not, those shoes cost 4 times more than a standard pair. I unfortunately still have to drive, you know, to work sometimes and to other places because of where I live. Um, and I want to go electric, but I realize I can't even afford it
Mm.
because there's a premium that comes with an electric vehicle. I'm just highlighting some of these examples. I went to a pre-owned, pre-loved shop to perhaps get a new coat for myself. And I was like, why is this more expensive than a new clothes? I'm like, no, that can't be right. So, for a lot of people that are making sort of the more sustainable choices in quotes, they seem to be people with the means to afford it, and that cannot be right. And there might be economics, factors in play here in terms of demand and supply. Sustainable options aren't as mainstream as they should be. Hence, there's an initial cost to it, you know. But how we can bring that down is we can talk that, from now until tomorrow. I don't have all the answers to that. I wish I did. But I think with some government subsidies that could help. But as well, individually, if we all create this demand, going back to the point I raised about the critical mass, making it mainstream, making it, the norm rather than the exception, it might start to become more accessible. The story can be said about PV panels, solar panels. When they first, came into market 10, 20 years ago, they were very expensive. But today, almost anyone can afford them on their, as part of their homes. So yeah, I think this is one of the things we can do is we got to still make those choices. We've got to keep talking about, what these options are, raising awareness of them. We need some help, from government and industry to make these things a bit more if you like, affordable,
Mm.
so to speak. For larger businesses and organizations, they have resources to initiate sustainability programs. SMEs, small medium enterprises, will struggle, because number one, they're thin on the ground in terms of human capital. They are also slightly disadvantaged in terms of economic capital. So empowering all these industries to be able to take the right step. There are many people out there that want to do the right thing, but sadly, they just don't have the means to be able to do it. I mean, sustainability is three pillars: is environmental, is social, and is economic. Yeah, it's got to have those three things in place in order for it to really happen. And some things may be slightly beyond individuals. This is why we need help. We need the right kind of policies coming down from government, but the federal, from the local level, in order to make these things attainable and real to everyone.
I love that. It's about making it real and affordable. And one of the things that you've touched on and we spoke about earlier was innovation. And I think,
Mm,
particularly bigger companies that are producing a lot of the mass-produced items that we know have single-use plastics need to sit there and be like, actually, how do we innovate to change this? Because this can't carry on. We know it can't carry on.
mm,
And I think they need to take that accountability that we spoke about earlier of actually how do
mm,
they drive that forward? And I think for individuals, as you say, even if it is something that's outside your price point, the more you campaign, the more you ask for it, the more you demand it,
mm,
emails, messaging backwards into that company, the more they're going to be hearing it. It's not necessarily about sales for them, it's about
mm,
complaints. And it's
mm,
about, what are they hearing from the
mm,
consumers? And if the more
mm,
people are pushing that, the more it's going to help bring that price point down and into of small businesses, medium-sized
mm.
businesses that are creating sustainable products. So there is a way to do it. It's just how
Yeah,
are we scaling this up across the world, really. And that brings us back to Earth Day. It's our planet and our power. And that's all we have time for in today's episode. But do join us next month, where we're diving straight back in with Tunde and carry on this exploration by asking him to share his insights and experiences of immigrating to the UK and creating a new life here. Until next time, keep learning, and remember, if you follow your passion, you'll be surprised where you can end up. I'm Lisa Burrell, and this is WANA Pod by WANA Learning. See you next time.